those first 4 years, it was like I knew something wasn't 100% like how my brain works.
Yep.
But I didn't know it would become what it did. And then one day he was Regis, and then the next day it was like a new person was there. And it kind of came out of nowhere, and it went from like, oh, I'm depressed to, this whole deep schizophrenia. So
Welcome to A Place of Yes, a podcast about how I moved through my darkest hour. And for me, that was in channeling my grief into good. Welcome to the show. Hi, I'm Heather Straughter. Welcome to A Place of Yes. Prior to listening to my conversation with Madison, I want to share that we cover some complex and potentially triggering topics in this episode. We talk about mental health and we talk about suicide. We discuss the complexities of mental health in a relationship, as well as the impact of loss by suicide and the feelings of guilt often accompanied by such tragedies. If you or someone you love is having suicidal thoughts, you can find help by calling the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988. So welcome to A Place of Yes podcast, where we focus on channeling our grief for good. Today, I am sitting with Madison Reuter, who is very special to me for very many reasons. First, I was a guest on your podcast and it was the first anything podcast that I had done. I knew that I was doing this podcast, but it's one of those things where you have a great idea, but you actually realize you have no idea what you're doing. And being a guest on your show was A, awesome, and B, gave me this sort of feeling that maybe I could do this. So thank you for that.
Well, thanks for being on my show. I was really nervous leading up to that. I was like...
Were you nervous leading up to that?
I was so nervous.
Did we know each other before?
We never met.
So it was like a cold
meet.
Okay.
And then we're talking about like the most traumatizing thing,
Normal. Yeah, totally normal. And then for my audience, you are the editor of this show.
Yes.
This is another thing that I had no idea a year ago about the relationship between like a podcast host and their editor. I had no idea, I was just like, oh, someone edits the show. But I had no idea the relationships you build in this. And I'm so grateful for it. And I am so grateful for the time, the energy, the thoughtfulness you put into the show. I feel super safe, right? I feel like for my guest and for myself, whatever we're saying, however it goes, whether it's emotional or vulnerable or whatever, I know that you are going to turn it into exactly what it's supposed to be. So
thank you.
I'm very grateful for that. So thank you. And here you are. So you are not here just as the editor or as your own podcast host. You are here on this grief podcast because you are very well versed in the world of grief.
Yes, unfortunately.
Unfortunately. Can you share with my audience a little bit of your story?
I guess I started my podcast similarly to how you've done yours, just talking about your grief experience and sharing that with the audience and kind of creating a space for that conversation. So my story is definitely complicated, definitely different than maybe some of the other guests you've shared. So in 2022, I lost my ex-partner to suicide. We were together for 6 years. At the time of his death, we were not together, which complicated it that much more.
Sure.
And he struggled with schizophrenia. So that in itself was suicide aside, the whole schizophrenia aspect was such a confusing journey for both of us, for his family, for all of his friends.
Was he diagnosed with schizophrenia the entire time you were in the relationship, or was that something? Okay.
Yeah. So I guess this is an interesting crossover. I guess just because of the rare disease that you talk about a lot, I feel like that's why, in a way, I sort of have an understanding, because this is an illness that's very stigmatized and
Yep.
It's hard for a lot of people to understand, and you're living in this world trying to deal with it in a world that doesn't.
And in a
deal with it
world
well.
that only knows about it through TV shows or whatever dramatic way,
Yes,
not in a real way.
1,000,000%. But to answer your question, the first probably 4 years of our relationship, I knew he struggled with his mental health. And it was mostly just like depression, anxiety, normal like teenager stuff. Yeah. And we met when I was 13. We started dating when I was 14. So we were like little, so we're growing up together. Yeah. I had no perspective outside of him.
Well, you only know what you know.
Yeah. So, those first 4 years, it was like I knew something, wasn't 100% like how my brain works. Yep. But I didn't know it would become what it did. And then the last 2 years of our relationship, it went from, one day he was Regis, and then the next day it was like a new person was there. And it kind of came out of nowhere, and it went from like, oh, I'm depressed to, this whole deep schizophrenia. So
how did you handle that? I mean, I'm thinking, and part of what I want to talk with you on the show is, and this is crazy, but like I'm old enough to be your mom, right? Like, so I think about how, from that perspective, like as I think about my audience who's probably close in my age, but how do we help? How do we guide? How do we do all of those things?
Yeah.
But so let's stick with this. So how did that impact your relationship? Is that when you kind of broke up, or did you remain friends? Or
so it got to a point where, as much as I loved him and I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him, like I was perfectly content with that. But it got to a point where he was so out of control of his mind and his actions that it became sort of unsafe to be around him. Okay. And so it was really hard because it's one of those things where it's like, I love you, but I have to put myself first.
Yes.
And making that decision, I think I was 20, I was like...
You're still so, yeah.
I had no idea. And
you don't even know who you are, really.
Yeah. And I never thought things would end up where they did. I thought even at the time it's as simple as, well, maybe if I break up with him, he'll actually get help, but then it'll be good and we'll get back together. But I didn't realize it's not as simple as just like going to therapy. So it was a complicated thing, but I had to kind of put myself first. And, we kind of mutually broke up. We knew it was the better choice for both of us at the time. And we stayed best friends. Okay. There was never a time where we weren't in each other's lives since I was 13 years old. In those last years, like we were still talking all the time. We still talked on the phone. We still did all of that. It was only the last 3 months of his life that he completely just didn't speak to me.
Did he recognize, this might be a stupid question, but did he recognize that he had schizophrenia? Like, was he being treated for it? Was he like actively diagnosed, or is this sort of after the fact that you kind of, how did that...
So this is where it becomes super complicated because with schizophrenia, so I guess we should say, for those of you who don't know, what schizophrenia is, it's a, mental illness where you kind of have a false sense of reality. It's usually triggered like in your early 20s. Okay. And oftentimes you might have a family history of it. Sometimes you don't. But essentially it kind of takes over your whole life, and you kind of almost have like delusions, hallucinations. You might believe things that aren't real. You might have these plot lines in your head that feel real to you, but to the outside world, it's like, you have no idea that nobody else is on that same page. With him, he had no sense of the fact that what he was dealing with was not real.
Okay.
So it was really hard to get him help because he thought anyone who was trying to push him to get help was part of this plotting against him. He was on medication for a while, but he started to believe that the medication was like part of the problem, part of the story, the plot line.
You hear that time and time again, right? In the story of mental illness, where there is something, then you begin like a medication or a therapy or all of the sort of things. Mm-hmm. And then that sort of turns, it no longer works for the person, or they believe that they don't need it.
Right.
And then they, so it's that cycle, and it's heartbreaking because I don't have a ton of firsthand experience with that type of relationships or loss, but I do know some friends or siblings of friends who have been in that cycle, who start to do really well and then think they don't like the way the medicine makes them feel, or they don't recognize that it's the medicine that is in fact allowing them to live this sort of more successful and productive or whatever typical life. How hard is that? And I can only imagine being the age you were, because that is such a difficult, 50. So like you look back, like that's a difficult time because you're trying to figure out, like under the best of circumstances, your late teens, your 20s, like those are times where you're just they're great times, but they're also hard times. How did you navigate that? Like, how did you protect yourself? How did you have the strength to sort of say, wait, I got to walk away now?
It was really hard because I think when you care about somebody so much, prioritizing yourself is, it almost seems impossible. And the only thing that kind of got me to the point where I could make that decision was I was moving to the city to go to college, and he didn't want to go to the city.
Okay. So it was like a natural, they're kind of a more natural breaker.
It almost felt like this is a good opportunity for me to just do this. And in my head, it wasn't forever. You know, it was, he's going to figure out his stuff, get on his feet, and then he's going to come to the city or whatever, you know, played out. But it didn't go that way.
So right now you are 24?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's still very recent in your life, right? So we're talking about the course of 4 years.
Yeah, and he died in 2022. So it's almost November 6th will be 2 years.
November 6th. Okay, 2 years. You had mentioned in the 3 months prior to his death that things had taken a turn. Are you comfortable talking about any of that, or?
Yeah, so it at the time didn't register in my head. Yeah. I just thought, oh, he's busy, he's doing well, whatever. But he just kind of stopped talking to me. So I was like, okay, maybe we're just not talking right now. Yeah. You know, later finding out he was, you know, finalizing his life and figuring out the specifics of what that was going to look like. And he just didn't want to involve me in that. At least that's how I've kind of had to look at it.
No. How did you figure that out? So he commits suicide. You didn't see that coming. And that's a loaded question because I think in these situations, there's that dangerous part of ourselves, right, that looks back and says, oh, shoulda, woulda, coulda.
Right. So I kind of always knew that this is where, and it's hard to say that because people are like, oh, then why didn't you do anything? But it's so much more complicated than that. And I think that's what people don't realize is at some point you've exhausted all your resources as a support system. I wasn't shocked when I found out. Okay. That's not to say I wasn't, you know, devastated, heartbroken, whatever. But I was like I did see it coming in many ways.
Oh, Madison, I'm so sorry. I mean, that is such a loss. And you and I have talked about this, right? Like loss, it can be so big and it can be so consuming and it can be so overwhelming. And this isn't really, but under the best of circumstances, right? Like we've talked to people here on the show who have lost their parents to old age.
Right.
And I never want to minimize loss because it's all impactful. But some of that is a little bit like, it doesn't make it feel better when you're in it, but it's like the circle of life, right? Like we are supposed to bury our parents because that is how things work. When that order is shifted, when it is a child, in my case, like I always feel like you're not supposed to bury your kids. It's like a rule, and you're not supposed to lose your friends in such a horrible way. And I admire that you have taken that and are doing so much personal growth, but also taking it and using it as like a beacon to help others. I mean, I think that's really admirable. Do you have guilt associated with that? How do you process that? And does it get easier after 2 years, or is it like grief and some days suck and some days are better?
Yeah, it's really that. I personally, in the beginning, had some guilt, more or less, that I didn't reach out more in that last 3 months. Okay. Obviously, had I known, I would have been reaching out daily. There's nothing I wouldn't have done.
Of course.
But then to put it in perspective, whether I reached out or not, he was not going to be responsive to that. Yeah. And I truly believe that I did everything that I could to help him. And I just kind of have to believe that he feels the same way. And that's why he stopped using me as a resource in the end. Because I think if he had any hope for things getting better, he would have reached out to me because he knows I would have been there.
And would have done anything.
I literally would have done anything. So guilt for me, I feel really lucky because I don't have a ton of it. I think if some circumstances were different, it definitely would. But I think I relate a lot to what you've said about Jake and the day that he died. Like if it wasn't on your watch, it would be a different story. And though my situation's not the same, I think it's kind of like all the stuff that we did leading up to that point makes our processing different. Yeah. And I don't know if that will make sense to everybody, but
no, but it's the idea that you can feel okay because you know that under the circumstances you did what you could do and had to do, and there's comfort in that.
Yeah.
And when, you put it on someone else, then there's different.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Like, had anybody else been in my shoes and, not done more, I would be pissed.
Yeah. Like it's hard to.
You can make peace with the choices you
Yes.
made,
And that's exactly it. That's you can make peace with what you did and how you did it and why you did it.
Yeah.
But it's harder to do that for other people. It's harder to weed out the blame.
That's the thing. There are people that I am mad at. There are people I couldn't be more angry with. And then, you have to bring yourself back to earth and be like, but they didn't know either. You know what I mean? But, with myself, I can kind of grasp it differently just because, out of everybody, I was the closest person to him always. So it's.
And I say this because I think about this with Jake sometimes, right? I feel good most of the time that I wouldn't change a lot, right? That there's not much in that journey I would have changed. Yes, there's the little things, would I not have fed him that night at the time that I did? If I could have altered history, would I have? Of course. But as I look back as being Jake's mom, there's not much I would have changed. And there's comfort in that.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you look back at your 6 years with him. And when you talk about, and you and I haven't talked about this before, but when you talked about being 13 and him being, your boyfriend and that part of life, there's nothing you would have changed.
My life now, I'm so happy with where I'm at. And it's so similar to what you talk about. You are the person you are because of all the things that have happened. And, what happened with Jake has contributed to the person you are. And that sucks. And it's it's stupid. You're
Yep.
I'd rather be the worst person
I'd rather
in the
be a
world.
shitty human, frankly. Yeah.
Literally. I'd rather be ignorant to what schizophrenia is, not have a deep understanding of suicide loss,
mental health.
Would love to be in those shoes again if he was still alive, but he's not. So you kind of just have to take it and be like, okay, now what? But yeah, there's not much that I would change because I think my time with him was what it needed to be, and it was enjoyable.
And it sounds like you believe that it was for him as well.
Yeah.
When it feels shitty and it's really hurting, that has to be somewhat comforting.
Yeah,
in a weird, it's a weird level of being able to process that. But
it's the one thing that is comforting is that I know, and it really kind of does go back to those last 3 months. He didn't reach out to me because he felt that our relationship at that point, he didn't want to bring me into that. And he still to the end, he valued me. And as literally cursed as it sounds, I think he didn't reach out to me because he didn't want me to feel any more guilt than he knew I already would.
Yep.
Had he reached out, had we been in communication, and then, one day he just doesn't text me and he's dead, the guilt I would feel is so different. So I think
it's almost like an act of kindness.
Yeah, and it's weird to say that, but
No, I get it.
But
though.
it really is because I think he valued our relationship just as much as I did, and he knew how this would impact me, and he tried to make that impact less horrible.
I ask this to a lot of my guests. It's something that I have always done and always felt, but didn't know other people did it. Because, I do find grief, in so many ways, you're so alone. Now I talk about it more than I sort of ever did, but you kind of live your own world handling grief however it is, right?
Yeah.
So do you talk to him? Do you talk to Regis? Do you get signs from him? Do you believe in any of that? And do you feel any of that?
So I feel like I'm the outlier here.
Okay.
The only time I talk to him is when I'm really, really mad at him.
Okay.
Just screaming, oh my God, why did you do this?
Okay.
All that kind of frustration comes out. But for the most part, I don't. And I also don't get signs.
Okay.
And that's something that I have struggled with so much. That has actually been probably one of the most difficult things because I think.
Because are you like me? Come on, hi, here I am?
Yes, it is so frustrating. I'll see cardinals and I'm like, okay, Jake. Jake is out here giving me signs. Where's Regis? What? It can be really frustrating because I hear so many people talk about it and having that connection. And then I'm like, am I doing something wrong? Am I overlooking it? Does he hate me? All these things. You
can go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. A medium did tell me that he just doesn't want to bother me. And he just wants me to work through this at my own pace, which is kind of exactly what I need. And whether that's true, I don't know. But
well, it's interesting because what I was going to say is, and this is the mom in me, right? A, you're in a relationship now with Jake, which I like to,
right.
It just makes me happy. Not my Jake, your Jake, because that would be weird. You might want to edit that out.
Yeah. Madison, edit that out.
But I think like there's part of me that's probably like in those 3 months before he passed, he was kind of putting a little distance for all of the reasons that you said. And it makes sense to me that he is wanting you to go on with your life and not for you to feel guilty, not to be like, oh, hey, I'm in this relationship and I'm doing really well in my life. Like I could see that, you know, and there's part of me too that thinks you're so young still, you know, and there's your whole life for this, you know, and maybe he's just like riding it out. Like I 1,000% believe that at some point you will figure out who he is here as, you know, I mean, whether it is a butterfly or like whatever the hell it is, like, and I just sort of feel like I know that, but it doesn't surprise me that it's, you know, it's taking its time.
It's very true because I think like I'm too deep for my own good sometimes. And I think I would, like he knows, I would be like obsessed. Like every little bug, every like flicker of a light, I would be like investigating like way too deep. It would probably not be good for me in the long run. One thing I do have though is I dream about him a lot.
Do you?
A lot. Yeah. And my whole family does. Like my mom will text me and be like, Regis is my dream last night. It's so like so many of us do. So.
I love that. So let me ask you this. When you dream about him, is he like this age? Like, is it like this version of him or is it a version you knew as a kid? And does he talk? Like, I'm always fascinated with dreams.
So it's kind of like the way that I remember him in the best times.
Okay.
Like it's kind of right before all of this happened.
Okay.
And we have like really deep conversations. Like there was one dream where, you know, I walked into my bedroom and he was in there painting this like beautiful mural on the wall. And it's kind of weird because he was an artist and I feel like artist is even kind of an understatement. Like he was a genius artist. Wow. Like I will never see something like this again in my lifetime. Any medium of art he could pick up and understand it and master it that day.
That's amazing.
I should preface, before he passed, he did this painting of where he thinks he's going after he dies. Oh. And I have it in my house and I look at it all the time and, you know, that's like a comfort. So in this dream, he was painting that painting on my wall in my room. And I was like, whoa, that's kind of crazy. And I was talking to him about it. And then he was basically telling me, like, you need to stop obsessing over where I am. Look at the painting. This is where I am. And I have a hyperfixation on like, you know, where is he? Like, it doesn't make sense to me that someone dies and they just like literally disappear, never to be seen again. Like that is a crazy concept to me. So he told me in the dream that he's like, you as a human being cannot understand where I am. Like it is just beyond human experience. He called it the oblivion. Oh. And it was very bizarre. Like
that, I mean, so I'm going to say that screw a cardinal. That is way more profound than any
like saying it's too deep.
No, that's amazing. It's amazing. And it's super deep, but I so love that for you because I think like I'm a little jealous, I'm not going to lie. Like in the world of like this kind of grief where like that kind of communication.
It's crazy. I don't want to wake up. I'm like,
no, you just want to stay here forever.
Yeah. And every time I have those dreams at the end, he hugs me and he's like, I'll be back soon, but like stop waiting for me to like come into your dreams. Just like, I'll come when I feel like it. And
I love that. I want to circle back to what you said because I agree. Like this idea, it leads me to two topics with death, right? Like it's this idea of what happens. Like, and I have that same brain where it's like, if you try, it's like you try to make sense of it.
Yeah.
And it's impossible. Like it's absolutely impossible.
It's frustrating.
It's frustrating. It's impossible. And it's like you want to, or at least I want to believe that there's this afterlife and that there is this, I don't know that I call it heaven or what. Like, you know what I mean? Like I have talked about before, like right after Jake died, I obsessively started going back to church. Like I hadn't gone to church in years. Like I was raised Catholic and then at a certain point, just it didn't feel right for me. Like I sort of, I don't want to say lost my faith, but it just wasn't what I chose to kind of keep doing. And after he died, I would make Ethan go to, like I was like, we're going to church, like religiously. Mm-hmm. Brian's not Catholic. He's Muslim. Like I'd be like, no, you're coming to church. Like we were like, the family's going to church. He's like, okay, Heather, whatever.
We're going.
Yeah. And we did it fairly regularly for a couple of years. And I made Ethan do his like First Communion and his confirmation and all those things because it didn't make sense to me, but I felt like it was something to grab onto.
Right.
And then I have since sort of become more comfortable with it, but it's this weird concept, right? It's this concept of like, where do they go? What happens? Like, I believe very wholeheartedly that our people are around us and they are part of us and they are guiding us. Like, I do believe that, but it's weird because it's not something you can just
Google.
It's not something, there's not like a textbook and you learn this and it's like, oh, if A, then B.
There
like,
it is, yeah. No.
Have you ever read the book called Many Lives, Many Masters?
No.
Okay, I'm going to give it to you. When Jake died, my friend Kelly gave this to me and I was like, what is this? Like, this is crazy. And
I feel that. Every time someone would offer me a book, I'm like, get it away from me.
Yeah, I was like, this is lunacy. Like, but I will tell you, I read it and it provided me with so much comfort of exactly what we're talking about.
Wow.
It's basically that you have these different lives, right? That is not something I ever, before reading this book, thought about. I never had an opinion whether I believed in it or not. It was just not something I thought about. But the way he writes this book was such what I needed to hear. And it talks about weird things where, like, sometimes it doesn't make any sense, but you meet somebody and you're totally connected with them.
Yeah.
And it talks about, like, well, maybe 400 years ago, you guys were friends, you know what I mean? Or you had this relationship. And it was funny because right after Jake died, there were certain people that I just connected with or who I could take support from better. My friend Kelly being one of them. I'm going to give it to you because not so much that you're like, oh, hey, I have to believe this.
Right.
But it was such an interesting perspective. And like we just said, you can get lost in this lack of answers or in like what happens or where do people go. And I'm not saying this is the answer, but it's an alternative that is kind of fun to believe or fun to get lost in.
I love
a
good theory.
Yeah, it's a theory. It's a solid theory.
Yeah, because, for me, I'm very like, we die, energy is released from our body.
Yep.
And that energy is around. And like, that's the thing that we feel
when you think of others.
When you feel that person around. But as for like an afterlife, I don't know if I'm like just being too critical and like, overthinking it or like I have frustrations with the afterlife because, Regis killed himself. So he wouldn't be in a place where, there would be peace. And so you kind of go through all these
you can't believe or believe's not the word, but
like you almost feel like
it's like you find the loophole and then it's uncomfortable.
And then the other thing, I know I'm not going to heaven. So if he goes to heaven and I don't go to heaven,
then like
what good does that do for me,
No.
So there's like a lot of nuances where I'm like, I almost don't want it to be real. I almost just hope that it's not real because then if like one of us is not going to be
somewhere else.
Yeah.
Lost.
Yeah.
One of the things in those days right after Jake died, and he had this like bean bag, and I kept getting out of bed and like laying in the bean bag because I just didn't know what else to do with myself. And when I would lay there, sometimes I would get this like really, really, really cold air around me. And I would like breathe it in because I was like,
I feel that.
And I was like, this is him. And so when you said that, it kind of was like, they hang out, right? Like they stick around to make sure that you're going to be okay. And I don't, even if I'm saying it, I don't know that I believe. Wait. I'm like, like, what am I saying? Like, what are you talking about, Heather?
Right.
But like, I remember feeling like that. And they would say like, the cold air is them.
Well, I always think like, if you feel like it's that person, just go with it. Just like ride the wave.
No harm, no foul.
Might as well. Like, what's the worst that can happen sort of thing.
No, it's funny the realities we can make for ourselves, right?
We literally can like, make up a whole world. There's so many like little things. And I know you've talked about this a lot too. Like you have that one shirt of Jake's.
Believe the Hype.
Yes. Yeah. And like you just keep it around.
Yeah.
And
it's on our headboard right now.
Yeah. People don't get that.
No.
People might think it's weird or like, isn't it time to, put that away or whatever. But we do these weird rituals to like keep ourselves grounded in the fact that this person was real at one point and they did exist and they were like a life-size human being that experienced things.
Yeah. Some people who have, I think, gone through grief, but just don't really face it. And then some people who haven't yet experienced in a way that is, I don't want to say significant, but in a way that is so overwhelmingly big, is that people do say that, right? Like they do believe it's time to move on. They think that helps, right? Or the people who are like, oh, don't focus on that anymore. Right. Focus on the good. Like stuff
he would want you to be happy. He wouldn't want you to be crying. He would,
Like all that stuff. And it's shut up. Because I think that people do think that I'm sort of well-adjusted. But when you were, you brought up that shirt, which I'm like, is so normal to us now. That will never not be on our head.
Right.
Like it's just
part of your
It's just part of our, like I don't even, I actually sometimes forget how weird it is. You know what I mean? Like just because it's normal. But like in our guest room, I have drawers full of his stuff still. Like I went through a lot of things, but there are some things that I just didn't. at this point, I'm like, it's been almost 14 years. Like, what's the point in doing it now?
Right. At this
Like,
point, I might as well just let it sit.
like, it's true, right? Like, people they want you to stop sometimes. And I think we agree on this. And I think the more people who we talk about this there is no end to grief, right?
No.
It's just part of who we are now. How do you handle the ups and downs of grief? And how do you handle that sometimes you're going along your life and and I don't know, you're still young in your grief, right? Like 2 years.
Yeah.
But I can go through stretches where like I forget to go to the cemetery. I don't really talk to him. I don't think about it. And then all of a sudden it's like a Mack truck.
So when you started talking about the cemetery thing on your show, I really related to that. Not even with Regis. I had a friend who passed when I was 16, and we were really close. His name was Jake too.
There's a lot of Jakes in your life.
The
I like
Jake
it.
thing is kind of wild. Yeah, it's kind of wild. There's a lot, but I would, at first I would go visit literally every day. Then all of a sudden it was like less and less and less. And I just had this recurring thought of like, I have all the time in the world, and how bad of a friend am I that I can't spend 2 minutes? I can't find 2 minutes for someone who literally doesn't have any time. Like he's not here. He doesn't get to have time anymore. And so I would beat myself up that like I couldn't even find, a minute to go. Then when Regis passed, he was cremated. So I have him in my apartment.
Do you?
Yeah. So
do you have all of him, or does his family have some? Split him up?
Yeah, he's kind of split up. Okay. Part of him is sprinkled in the Colorado River. I can spend time with him. I literally take him places with me. Like,
do you?
I take him to concerts.
Do you really? I love this.
Yeah,
walk me through this. Like, so do you?
Funny story. So I went to see one of our favorite bands probably like 3 months after he died. And I have this little pouch in my pocket, like not thinking of powder.
Oh, no.
And he got confiscated.
Oh, Regis.
Which is so Regis, like, of course. So the security had to hold on to him. And I'm like, come on. Like, you can see that it's not.
Like, it's not even the right color.
It's literally gray.
Yeah.
Like, please. So after the show, I got to get him back.
Oh, you got him back.
It was so scary. I was like, if I don't get this back, like, I'm actually going to die here. Like,
I feel like I talk a lot about jealousy on the show, about weird things. Mm-hmm. This is another thing, right? So again, because I was raised Catholic and the whole purgatory thing, I was very like adamant in my grief that he could not be cremated.
Yeah.
I have since been like, not that I regret it, because I like having a place. I like the whole process of how we did it. And I'm not sure that I could have wrapped my head around my little boy. Like I don't know that my head could have done that, like the cremating thing. Mm-hmm. But I love these stories of when you have these pieces with them, right? Like, and I feel like I figuratively bring him everywhere, but you really do.
I got him in my pocket. Like, I can bring him around.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So do you... Like, you have like an urn, like you have them in something, and then you just like scoop a little out and bring. Like, I'm being very stupid about this, but I need to know.
So he's in like a plastic bag that's in like a velvet pouch, and then I put that pouch in the urn. So it's like it's like, it looks nice, whatever. It's not just a velvet sack on a shelf. And then I take the bag out when I go. So
do you take all of him when you go? So if you, I know this is like, I'm sorry.
I really do. No, don't apologize. I love this because I don't get to talk about this. Everyone thinks I'm weird.
No, I'm like oddly obsessed.
No, I bring him everywhere. Like his favorite band was Cage the Elephant. They came to SPAC. I went with my brother and Jake, my boyfriend, and I'm literally not kidding you. This bag has like 2 strings on the side. My brother's holding one string, I'm holding the other, and we're dancing with this bag of ashes. It was the people around us were like, what the hell is even that? Like, but
I am obsessed. I think that is the most beautiful thing. I love everything about that. I think that is so awesome. The only thing that would stress me out is if you like, so when they confiscated him, that was it.
Oh, I was panicking. Yeah, I definitely shouldn't be bringing the whole thing.
I feel like we should divide that bag. Yeah. I feel like we should have the travel bag and then the like stay in the urn bag.
Right. That is so real.
So let me ask you this. Do you talk to his parents?
Yeah, I talked to his mom.
To his mom?
We're still really close. Yeah.
And does she know that you bring him around?
Oh, yeah. She knows everything.
And she loves that?
Yeah. She's very much like me in the way that we're handling our grief. Like, she's very open about it. She talks about it, and she, lets people know, and she loves that I bring him places.
I'm sure she does.
Yeah.
Like I would. That's awesome. Did Regis have siblings?
Yeah, he has 3 siblings.
Okay. We talked on the show once with like sibling grief. I'm oddly feel like I like to say I'm obsessed with a lot of things lately, but it's a thing that I think about, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Like I just wonder with them, right? Like because it's almost the focus is always on the parents or the
Yes.
partners
Yes.
or the the siblings are forgotten, and I wonder.
Yeah, they're
like
just
I'm
kind of like
curious.
along for the
Yeah.
journey. Like they might have a little bit of say here and there, but people really care about
The
other
different
people.
relationships a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I know his brother has done a lot of really cool things with his grief. Like actually even before, and this kind of ties into the anticipatory grief of it all. Like he wrote an album about Regis's mental health, and
Oh, wow.
he's a musician. So some of the songs he wrote, it's like I listened to them before Regis died, and now I'm listening to them after Regis died, and I'm like, oh my
Wow.
God, like we all knew.
It's interesting that, so the anticipatory grief thing, I was one of the guests on the show. I was reading her book, and she talked about how sometimes people have a hard time grieving because so much of their emotion was tied up in the anticipatory grief.
Or they felt like they've already grieved.
Yes, like you've been living in this world or in this headset or mindset for so long that you fear that the worst is going to happen, that when it actually does, it's less, I don't want to say impactful because that's not the word, but it has less of an impact on you than this period where you're on eggshells waiting.
Yeah, you almost become more analytical about it. Like, oh, this is what I've prepared for, so I can totally
So now
do
I'm ready to go on.
Yeah, I definitely had a lot of that too. Like when it happened, I said I wasn't shocked. I was very like, okay, let me like call my parents, let them know. I'm going to call, I was in college at the time. I'm going to call the school, figure out the resources, talk to all my professors. I'm going to,
like a
I
checklist.
like figured it all out. And then after all of that, I was like, oh,
here it is.
so I didn't get away from it. Like it is here.
You
Yeah.
just pushed it down the curb a little bit. What made you want to do the podcast, your podcast?
It's a hard question. I feel like it just kind of happened, and it was almost similar to how you started Jake's Help from Heaven. Like it was not that long after he died, and I think I was just looking for ways to feel like I wasn't drowning in it. And I think talking about it for me was hard because, being the age that I am, a lot of people haven't even, experienced the death of their grandparents. Like most people have not experienced like suicide, schizophrenia, you know what I mean? So I felt really, really alone in it. And I think for me, it was kind of like, how do I talk with people and how do I actually have these conversations without cornering my poor friends who, literally don't know what to say to me. They're just like, oh yeah, sorry, that sucks. So, how do I talk to people who get it?
Part of, it's funny because there's so much of this conversation that I've so enjoyed, and I did not see it going in some of the directions. Like I am filled with such joy as I picture you dancing at a concert with Regis. Like I love that so much. When Liv died and, Ethan lost his brother and there's been other death in his life.
Yeah.
But I think the death of a peer.
So
when you're young,
Yeah.
The death of a fellow teenager, of a young person is so impactful at that age.
Yeah.
I know for a lot of us parents, it was hard and is hard to sort of figure out how to be there. This is a loaded question, but how can people my age comfort people your age when they are going through things like this?
This is my soapbox right here. I think it's really weird when you're young and people your age die. You kind of realize like you're not safe. Nobody is safe. When the bad thing happens, you kind of think you're safe, but then you're like, wait, no, this could also happen to me. And I think for a lot of us, it's our first experience with like knowing that we're not also going to live forever. There are many times where I'm actually afraid that I'm going to become schizophrenic. I think about it so much. Anytime I'm like in a weird depressive state, I'm like, is it happening to me? Yeah. And I think like just for the younger people, something that somebody told me, like suicide in my case, it's not something that happens to you. Like I thought it was going to happen to me too, but it's not something that happens to you. It's, it's something you do. And so that kind of got me out of that cycle of like freaking out that I was also going to just
like it just would happen.
Die from suicide.
Yeah.
I think too, it's hard because there's a lot of, milestones and life experiences that you now have to live yourself. And that's no different from other people who are experiencing grief, but especially when you're so young, there's so many things in life that we're going to experience. And there's always going to be that other side of like, this person is not going to get to go through it. Like this year I'm going to be 25 and that makes me officially older than Regis. And that's weird and that sucks.
Yep.
I think for me, like what I would have needed from the older people around me was somebody to just listen and not like try to fix it or try to tell me like death is a part of life, this is what happens, blah, blah, blah. And just to be like actually there just to listen. I think a lot of times, especially our parents, they don't want us to feel awful. They want to fix it. They want to, make it feel better. But this is one of those things that doesn't feel better. And that sometimes we just have to talk about it without feeling like, the older person is going to try to like cure it, because there's no cure for grief. It just is. And it sucks and it hurts. And I think that's all normal. And I think I'm lucky to have that perspective as a young person because of, the good and bad of social media. But this is one of the good things, is like finding that community, feeling like we can be open and honest. But there is nothing like being open and honest with your parents, and, they understand you in a different way. So just being able to feel heard and not feeling like someone is trying to fix you.
I think that's huge advice. And I'm trying, like, as you're talking it, I'm like, Heather, shut up. Like, this is, because it's so classic.
Yeah.
It's classic parent. It's classic mom, right? Like, and when you said that, it really hit home, because with anything, like not even the big topics of grief, like I really have to force myself to just shut up when Ethan's telling me anything. Because I want to fix
like,
it.
I know the answer.
Yeah. Like I know.
There.
And I just think that's it's really important advice. And it's always comforting for the people who are in grief to just hear conversations about grief, because like you said, it makes them feel not alone. But a few people are like, I love when I have a takeaway, right? Like I love when I have something that I now know how to help my friend or my daughter or my cousin or my husband, like whoever's grieving. Like I have a toolkit almost of things to do. Thank you for that, because I think that a lot of people need to hear that. And we like to make it bigger than it is. We like to think that the solution is bigger, but oftentimes the solution is be quiet, listen, and acknowledge, right? Like that's like it
less
doesn't
is more, honestly. Like I can imagine as parents, I mean, even me as an older sibling, like when my brother's going through stuff, I'm like, oh, I've been there. Like I want to fix it. I want to help you. And you can't. Like sometimes you just have to sit with them.
Yeah. My last thing that I wanted to ask, and I've been back and forth with this, I know Jake a little bit. How is he with all this? He seems so unfazed.
Yeah.
But is he unfazed, or does it feel sometimes like there's another person in your relationship, right? Like, I mean, how, and if that's like personal, then
no. This is really interesting. I mean, I think I'm super lucky in this experience because he has always accepted that Regis is there. Like he's just a part of this, and
like he's coming to a concert with you.
Yep. Like he's just on the journey with me. You know what I mean? I know not everybody has that, but I think Jake is just very level-headed and just like emotionally mature. And it's so hard because I think a lot of people will think like, oh, well, if Regis was here, you would still be with him and you wouldn't even like know Jake or whatever. But the reality is that's not the reality. Yeah. At the end of the day, like I chose to move forward, and I guess, like, overall, it's never been a weird thing. I can talk about Regis with Jake. I can be open about it. I can share stories, experiences, and it's never been something that he's made a thing. Yeah. So I feel really lucky in that regard, because I know a lot of people, like, think it's weird or, like, don't want to share those stories, or just there's almost like a weird competition of, like...
Well, that I was like, I do think that there is, and you said, like, emotional maturity, because I do think there is some emotional maturity at that, right? Like to be confident and comfortable enough to hold space for Regis and be okay with it, but be confident in your relationship. Yeah. I think it's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely doesn't make it like a thing, and he will even ask me about Regis. Like, it's not something I always have to bring up. Like, sometimes he'll just be like, oh, did Regis like to do this? Or did you guys ever do this together? So he actually makes it normal for me.
I love that.
I don't have to take that first step of talking about it every time.
That's awesome. I think about, you met him when you were 13, and you guys are spending the bulk of really that part of your childhood together. I know that I think back very, very long time ago, but I think back to some of those years, and I think of my best friends at that time, right?
Yeah.
And they are like nothing else. It's like when I was becoming who I'm going to be, and when you're testing boundaries and pushing the envelope and making horrific choices, at least in my
Mine too.
teenage years, real bad choices.
Yeah.
When that person is no longer with you, does that impact any of those memories, or have you been able to work through that? And like, how do you feel with that? Because I think of those and I think of like safety and happiness, and I don't know, like part of that is age making it one way, but how is that for you?
This is a really good question, and it's very complicated because my entire life is basically Madison and Regis and Madison. It was always that. Every milestone I've ever had, Regis was there or a part of in some way. So I think it's always bittersweet looking back on literally my entire life, because I almost don't even remember my life before him. Like, who was I? I don't know, but, my music taste, the movies I like, all of these like things about me were formed through him. Yeah. And he was a year older than me, so it was always like, he always knew more than me, and he always knew the cool music and, whatever. It's hard to look back on all of that, and, like music specifically is a really big thing for me, and just like all the songs I listen to, all the concerts I go to, it's a hard thing. And there's just so much of me that is attached to him, which is also weird because in a way I almost feel like a living part of him. He's not here, but I'm literally basically him. We have the same interests, same sense of humor. Like, if you met him and I, you would be like, these people are exactly the same. In a way, it's like losing part of yourself and not knowing how to be a person without that. And that has been one of the hardest parts for me. It's weird kind of almost being his memory keeper. Yeah. In a way, like I'm the person who can share all those things, and I'm the only one with access to that. So in a weird way, it almost gives me this responsibility to live when even sometimes I don't want to, because I'm kind of what's left.
Madison, I love that. I mean, I don't love that because I feel the weight of that.
Yeah.
But I love that perspective on it, because when you're that entwined with someone, I feel you, right? Like, it's like, who are you without them?
Yeah.
But then you really are the keeper of all of the things, because that's part of that friendship at that age, right? And that's part of how you live at that age, right? It's just, I don't know, it's so, I feel like you live in the extremes at that age, right?
It's
like
so
you feel all the feels, and it's codependent,
it's
and it's like intense, and as it should be, because it's your teenage years. It is what it is. I like that you can take from that and, I don't know, be the keeper of those memories. Yeah. I don't want that to be too much like responsibility or pressure on you, but I think that if you can see it that way, it's kind of a...
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the only way I can see it, because if not, I'm like, well, this sucks and I gotta go. Like, I'm done. I'm out. So that's kind of been the thing that keeps me going, is like being able to share him. And that goes back to the podcast, and that goes back to the ways that I choose to keep him here, because that's what we have left. Everyone going through grief. It's like, you knew Jake his whole life. Yeah. Like, you are the one with all of those memories. Yeah. And then, like, if you choose not to share them, then where is Jake?
It just stops.
Yeah.
So we have reached the portion of our show where you get to ask Heather anything.
I have so many things. I feel like we need to do another episode on my podcast to like get into even more like the weird niche stuff.
Of which there's so much. Yeah.
Right. So I think maybe I'll just do more of like a general version of everything I want to ask you. What is the weirdest thing that your grief has made you do?
Oh God.
Or like, have you had like a weird conflict in your grief that you like can't figure out because you feel like you're doing the wrong thing, but it's like really doesn't, you know what I mean?
So this is like a generalized answer of this, because I feel like there's so many, especially in the early part of my grief. Mm-hmm. For me, it took me a while to figure out how to just own my grief and be okay with it, and not to be emotionally responsive to how people thought I should grieve. And because of that, I lived in this really angry space for a while, but I now know it wasn't so much anger that Jake died. And there was certainly some of that. Like, I'm not saying it wasn't there, but it was anger in how people responded to me. And I'm embarrassed a little bit by it now, but I would get really obstinate or like defensive, or, just kind of like, I didn't have the perspective to recognize people were trying to help. So I just was kind of an asshole. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah. So, and sometimes it would be people who really care about me that would be like, I hate to see you so angry.
Yeah.
And that would make me irate, and I would just explode on them. It took me a long time to find perspective with my grief. I just existed in this world where it was all about me.
Yeah.
And I think that's very common in grief, like to flip the lens and realize that other people are impacted kind of twofold, right? Like they're impacted by the loss of the same person, but they're also impacted by seeing someone they love so impacted by it.
Yeah. And then feeling like they can't grieve as much, or like they don't know where they stand
and
in it
making
all.
people so uncomfortable with
Yeah.
it. And I feel like that's a little bit of a weird answer about it, but all these years later, when I look back at that, it's what I'm embarrassed by, because I wasn't very nice to people.
Yeah.
And there's part of me that's like, it's okay, your kid died. But there's,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like, but they're really recognizing now all the things I know about grief and all the different ways people experience it.
Yeah.
I made it all about me, but it really wasn't all about me.
Right. I have like such a weird one. It's very different, but like Regis's mom gave me a bag of his stuff, and like I literally can't wash it. And I go back and forth. I have this like war with myself about it. I'm like, well, if I wash it, you know, maybe in a way it's like a sign of respect, and I can like wash it all and fold it and wash away that part of him that, you know, like this whole metaphor in my head, and like put it in a box. But then the other part of me is like, his literal DNA is on it. And then what if I wash that away? Then it's literally gone, and I can't unwash it if I wash it. So like, what do you do? And
well, I can tell you, I have 2 pieces of Jake's clothing that are not washed in my closet to this day. Like, I can tell you exactly where they are. One is the shirt that he was wearing when 911 came in, like the EMTs, and they cut it off of him. The reason we called 911 was like he was aspirating, and there was like, it was horrible. 14 years later, it's still there. I'm not washing it. We'll never wash it. And then there's this other shirt. So Jake, like, he ate by mouth, but like it was really hard to feed him, and he threw up. But so I have this other shirt that has his throw up on it. Like, I literally,
and it's like you can't.
I will never, like, it's in my closet. They're right there. I mean, I could take a picture of them. Like, it's kind of weird. Like, they don't really smell or anything, but it's like, I will never wash them.
Right.
Like, I will never wash them.
And people like, that's one of those things that people are like, well, just do it. Like, it's not
But no, like,
but it is.
No, it's like, and it's like, there's those moments that you will never, ever, ever get back. They will never make a sound again. Like that's, I struggled with that, right? Like, I'll never hear him make a noise again. Like, like those things that are just gone forever. And to me, I don't care like that. It's weird and really sort of disgusting.
Right.
Like, I just, that's a living, it's something I still have of his.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. Don't wash them. Thank you, Madison, so much. I have so enjoyed having you on this show. I feel like I could talk to you forever. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. You'll have to come back on my show.
I would love
for
it.
a part 2.
I love it. And for those of you who have enjoyed this conversation with Madison, I highly encourage you to check out her podcast. It is called And Also, and you can listen to it anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thank you for listening to A Place of Yes. Please follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you really like this episode, please share it with a friend. It would make a world of difference if we could just reach more people and share the work that we do and the stories we want to tell. Thank you so much for watching.